afternoon, everyone. Salam, everyone, and welcome to our very awaited panel, which we hope we to be able to generate important conversations at this urgent, critical time for so many of our communities, in particular for Palestine. So I'm Dr. Mayida Zaal. I'm an associate professor at Montclair State University, and I am a proud Palestinian Colombian community member and actively engaged with some of the movements that are happening locally and nationally as well. And proud to be a part of the organizing team for the Liberation-Based Healing Conference. So grateful for all the work that has gone on into creating these 2 days. So I'll talk a little bit about this panel and introduce our speakers today, and then we will jump right in. So this panel was inspired by the practice of collective freedom and liberation that both the Council for American Islamic Relations and the Palestinian American Community Center exemplify in their collective everyday struggle. In this discussion, we hope to lift up examples from both PACC and CAIR to answer questions you have about how to sustain, uplift, heal, and support communities through difficult, challenging times. So thank you, both of our speakers, Zahra Billoo and Rania Mustafa. I'll start by introducing both of you. Zahra Billoo is a civil rights attorney and the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in the San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome. The largest Muslim civil rights organization in the country. And for over 15 years, she has advanced justice in the intersections of race, faith, and immigration, challenging systemic oppression and uplifting marginalized communities. A trusted voice and grounded leader, Zahra builds spaces where people feel seen, heard, and empowered. Her work centers collective liberation, healing justice, and sustained community care. Thank you and welcome. Happy to have you. Rania Mustafa is a dedicated community leader and passionate advocate for empowerment and equity, serving as the executive director at the Palestinian American Community Center. With a master's degree in management from Harvard Extension School and graduate certifications in nonprofit and strategic management, Rania brings a wealth of expertise to her work. Her studies at NYU focused on identity development and the role communities play in shaping individuals. As the founder of Tamkeen Coaching and Consulting, Rania specializes in leadership development, strategic planning, and team building. She is a mother of 3, a lifelong learner, and a passionate advocate for leadership, parenting, and self-development. She finds joy in listening to audiobooks, reading, and bringing people together to form connections that spark growth and understanding. Rania's purpose is clear: to serve as a guiding light for individuals navigating crossroads in their lives, empowering them to emerge stronger and more confident contributors to society. And I think that really resonates with what we were hearing, especially at the end of the last panel, with regard to centering the strength and the resilience of communities. And that really is what brings us to this panel today. So thank you both again for being here. We're going to start by giving Rania an opportunity to talk about PACC and the specific work that they do, and then we'll move to you, Zahra, to give you an opportunity to talk about CAIR and the work that CAIR does. And then we'll talk about some of the terms that I think we're using that are important for our audience today to understand and to sort of share in the definitions that we're discussing, as then we continue to talk about the work that's being done with communities in solidarity, and sort of at the intersections of legal advocacy and community advocacy as well. Thank you. So Rania, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mayida Zaal, for moderating and for inviting us to this session. Thank you to all the organizers of the Liberation-Based Healing Conference. This is an amazing initiative, and I wish you all the most success. I was listening to the last session, and I was just thinking about how many important conversations that are being had here in this setting, and I wish that more people were able to hear and tune into these conversations, and that these conversations were happening in more, everyday life. So thank you all for everyone that was behind this, and thank you all for all of you for attending and joining today. So I'm just going to share my screen. So today I'm going to start off by talking about PACC, which is the Palestinian American Community Center. We're located in Clifton, New Jersey, and we were founded in 2014. Something that not a lot of people know is that Patterson and New Jersey at large is one of the highest number of Palestinians that exist in the country, second to Chicago, and in terms of Arabs, second to Dearborn, Michigan area. So we have a very high population of Palestinian Americans, and that's why PAC exists where it exists. And we were founded in 2014. So recently we celebrated our 10-year anniversary. We're at 11 years now, and we're looking forward to many years to come. So PAC is a nonpartisan, non-religious 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to strengthen and sustain ties to Palestinian heritage while empowering the success and well-being of the entire community. And we really do this rooted in our theory of change, where it's kind of you start at an individual level and then you continue to increase on the different levels of society. Our idea is if you empower individuals in our community, then our community will be organized and stronger. And if we empower our community, then we'll be able to enable positive change in our society, and hopefully, here and in Palestine. And then if we empower our society, then we're able to see long-term change where we can see equity and justice for all, and hopefully a free Palestine. So really our theory of change is very much rooted in the individual, but it's taking into account in this realization that every individual is part of a community, that's in part of a society, that's part of something bigger and larger than all of us. And our goal is to impact all of that. And how do we get to that point? So one really important thing I think with PAC is I was born and raised in New Jersey, and something that I knew growing up is I didn't have a lot of organizations or institutions that really reflected me, my values, what my understanding of the world, and how I, have grown up to see it. And in a lot of my studies when I was in undergrad, and then leading into some of my work and postgrad work, was this idea of like, as hyphenated individuals, we need this space to really understand ourselves and understand our identities. And that's really the only way we could emerge as stronger individuals, as truly integrated individuals, and as true contributors to society. And so at PAC, we're institution building, in many different ways, whether it be creating such an institution like PAC that really hasn't existed before, or in the same time of it being that our center is very much made by the people that it's serving, right? So you're investing back in this community. So this is this positive cycle that you're creating in terms of giving back to the community, in terms of forming the community, in terms of building this long-term society that you want to live in. You are serving the community, and through the community that you're serving, you are creating these institutions. So, we really do see PAC as an institution building, and we see it as also reclaiming our narrative, right? So it's not about us just showing up in different spaces and trying to see where we fit, but it's like we're creating this place where we could be our truest selves, and then creating this, community where we can continue to impact change in the long run. So one example of this, before we get into our focus areas, is that PAC is really focused on getting, again, this idea of institution building. So we have different talents within the community. And we have three specific case examples that I brought here. So like the first was we had a young lady who was in our community. She was very, very interested in journalism, but she didn't really have the outlet to do that. And she wanted to understand, like, how can I give back How can I learn more about this field? And so we worked together, we created a magazine. And I'm very proud to say that this magazine's actually been running for 9 years now. And she started off as a student interested in journalism, not even, wanting to go into journalism. And she became the editor-in-chief. And we worked together. We gave her the mentorship she needed. We gave her the resources she needed to work together to make this beautiful literary magazine that you can check out on our website. And what's amazing is that this directly fed into her long-term career, because now she is a journalist at a very, prestigious outlet, and she's been working, endlessly to continue bringing up our stories and giving a voice to the people who may, the platforms that may not necessarily highlight our voices. Another example of, again, this idea of institution building and this idea of giving back to our community is we had 2 soccer coaches in our community that were really passionate and loved the idea of soccer, and they wanted to give back. So we worked with them to start a soccer program in one of the refugee camps in Palestine, where they were able to fly out for a week and do this soccer program for them, while at the same time serving our community here, right? So we were able to launch a soccer program that served our kids here, and then also we're able to kind of fine tune on their specific talents, and we're able to do a soccer program in the Jala Zone refugee camp near Ramallah. Lastly, the last case example we have is that we have Shahid Khadash and Saleh Dawood. They're amazing producers that have had a long career in different things. And Shahid specifically has, been on many different films and shows. And so she was like, I want to give back, right? And it's back to this idea of like, I want to build something that makes sense. And so when everything that was happening the last 2 years with the genocide, she decided to really focus her talents and help us capture 4 different stories of families that we helped through, like, either we helped reunite some families, or we helped them highlight their stories or get some people out of Gaza. So through that, she was able to do that. And her biggest thing was, she said, it's time for us to tell our own stories, right? So it's back to this idea of, like, again, we're really giving back to the community, and we're really creating that cycle of positive change, so that people could see different ways of belonging. So with that, I want to go into our 5 focus areas. So the first focus area we have at PACC is empowering the community. So PACC is very much by the community for the community. And like I've been saying, like, we're very much rooted in this idea of community psychology, where we want to be able to give everyone the tools that they need in order to succeed. So as I'm speaking right now, for example, we actually earlier today, we had a resume workshop. We had a citizenship class workshop. We had a LinkedIn review and interview skills workshop, because it's these little things that are needed in our community that, if they're given the right tools, they can then get their basic needs met, and then they can give back in different capacities. But in this vein, we do many different things. Our idea is not to reinvent the wheel. So we do a lot of community needs analysis. We really have a lot of conversations with their community to try to understand what are the pressing needs and how can we meet them. So we have tutoring, we have homework help, we have some sports programming, we do language classes, we do DEPCA, which is a dance class. So there's a lot of different things that we're doing in that vein. Our second focus area is educating about Palestine, and this is something that we do in different ways. So our idea is to reach people in different demographics in any way that's possible. So we hold monthly events where sometimes we bring voices from Palestine on the ground to share. We bring in different people on the Palestinian American sphere to also highlight the different struggles, but we also do it in different ways of understanding our privilege as Americans and what does that mean and how can we advocate for Palestine in a way that makes the most sense. So one of the things we do is like the magazine. We also host workshops. So we go to different spaces and we host workshops. We also host workshops at PACC in many different ways. And I invite you to check out our website to see exactly what we do. Our third one is, again, this idea, our third focus area is civic engagement, and it follows along with this idea that we live in a larger society. It's not about just giving back to this silo. It really is engaging as a productive member of society. So we do town hall meetings. Recently, we did and we do this every year, a strong push to go out to vote. We're educating people about their rights. Our idea is really power building and letting people know that they deserve a seat on the table, and to make sure that they are sitting at the tables that matter. And our last two focus areas are socially serving the community and referrals. The idea is that we can't do everything. Many times we are the touch point to many people where we have to build these coalitions and be able to refer people out to be able to specifically meet their needs. We also do social services to a certain degree. The idea is that we teach people how to fish, not give them the fish. And this was actually born out of COVID. During COVID, we actually paused a lot of our day-to-day operations and we completely went into emergency mode where we were giving out like over 500 meals a day. We gave out over 7,000 PPE kits and all these different things. So that made us positioned this in a unique way where we were seeing a lot of different needs of the community. And so our idea was to do more long-term relief planning and more long-term education programming and vocational programming. So this is, I know I'm out of time, but this is basically a little bit more details, which I had already gone through of specifically what each of the focus areas focus on. So just looking at, like right now we are focusing on our 2025 impact and we're working on
You're fine, Rania. You can keep going.
Okay, thank you, Mayida. So for 2024, we're right now working on our 2025 impact, but I thought for today it would be powerful to share some of, like, I'm talking a lot of abstract. Like we have these 5 focus areas, we have all these different things happening, but what does that actually mean, right? So if you're actually looking at it and you want to see like what is the impact that's happening, I figured I'd share 2024 as just an idea. So our top events that year where we had a PACC conference, which we actually have one coming up, which is why I love this conference. It's really nice to see. We actually for a while went virtual, but we're now back in person. It's actually next Sunday, the 16th. So we highly encourage you all to come out. We also have something called Palestine Day and Palestine Way. And this is also kind of the idea of where all of the different focus areas intersect. So we advocated in Paterson, in New Jersey, to be able to rename part of Main Street into Palestine Way. And so since then, for the last 3 years, because it happened in 2022, we've been holding like an annual gathering, festival where we kind of celebrate our culture, but also educate about Palestine. It's very, very amazing. This year it's May 17th. I highly recommend you all to save the date and come out for it. We also have something called Palestine Week. So again, this idea of intersectionality of all our different focus areas, the mayor of Paterson declared a week in June as Palestine Week. So every year, we honor that week through different activities and we touch all our different focus areas. So whether it be having an educational event or a cultural event or an event where we're learning about our rights and how can we civically engage more. So we really try to focus all of that in that week. And then we had a rally that week because obviously the ongoing genocide, the genocide that peaked over the last 2 years, and then our community healing and empowering event, which also again speaks to everything that we were doing. So historically, we actually used to have this event, used to be a fall fest. Because of everything that's happened in the last 2 years, we've shifted the focus and it became more of a community healing event because that's our purpose, right? Is to be present for our community in the ways that they need it most. And so we were able to transform that event to do that. So we were able to reach through different methods 17,826 community members. We had 405 registrants in our community programs. We had 26 workshops in 2024 with 50 events. This picture is actually from the Palestine Day and Palestine Way. So as you can see, it's very crowded and there's a lot of people that come from all over. Also, during the last 2 years, we've had a huge emphasis on media interviews because if you Google Palestinian American Community Center, if you just Google Palestine or Palestinian American, PACC usually pops up. And so we usually, anytime there's anything that's happening, we're usually the first that many media outlets contact. And we had 60 different marketing campaigns, whether it be educational campaigns or different things like a get out the vote campaign or educating about what's going on the ground. And then we had a continued genocide response. I think our center was in a very unique position over the last 2 years where literally in one day you're handling calls from, hey, I need to get my family out of Gaza. How can I? To I'm getting fired out of my job because of speaking up for Palestine, to I'm feeling, discriminated against by my professor for speaking up for Palestine, to I'm feeling depressed because my people are being killed and I don't know what to do, to the media wanting to cover stories So about this endlessly, to giving, direct education, and like people now suddenly everyone know Palestine, what does that mean, what's going on, and like, educating people again that this didn't start on October 7th, what does that mean, and so on and so forth. So it was a lot of pressure on our organization the last 2 years, because away from our 5 focus areas and away from the day-to-day that we have, suddenly we had to hyper focus on these very real things that are happening, and very real needs of our community that they cannot feel anywhere else. And speaking back to the community healing event, I remember the first year we did it, which was in 2023. People literally just came into our center and they held each other and cried. And it was a sight that, like, honestly, till today, it's like cemented in my mind, because it showed the necessity of spaces like ours, because they said, I don't feel like anyone else sees me other than in this space. And they felt this like warmth, they felt this belonging that they weren't able to feel anywhere else. And that's what we hold on to, and we try to emulate it in all of our different events and programs. So specifically, we held in 2024 10 rallies and protests. We had 56 different press releases, and we held different press conferences. And all of this happened just in that 1 year. And I can tell you there's been a lot more that's happened in 2025, and a lot that's been going on since. And I know we're going to get into some of it in our questions and answer session with Dr. Zaal. So if anything you heard is interesting, I invite you all to subscribe to our mailing list. Definitely check out our website. I'll put it in the chat. It's www.paccusa.org. Make sure to follow us on our social media. We are on all social media platforms, including LinkedIn. We have to add that. So please make sure to follow us. And we face a lot of times a lot of I guess hate, a lot of hate from a lot of different areas, and it's really important to us that people show love to our to our different platforms. One last thing, and then I'll end with this, is people don't really think about like what that hate looks like. And we have a summer program that we do every year, and this year we had about 90 kids in our summer program, and we were posting very innocent, summer program stuff like coloring and the different activities we have. And the amount of hate comments we received is insane. Like, we received a lot of very, like they should just die. Well, they're going to end up, very, very, very harassing comments. Luckily, no direct threats. We were in touch with our local police department about, if anything needs to be escalated. But we try our best to like show that anti-Palestinian hate is very real, and we're subject to it every day, and our kids are subject to it every day, which is a reality that we have to remember. So I just wanted to thank you all for giving us this platform, and thank you, Dr. Mayida, and then I will turn the mic back to you.
Thank you so much, Rania. And I think those last points that you ended on, there's so much to recognize, lift up, and celebrate in what you described so far, of the incredible, amazing, expansive work that PACC does. And we also want to definitely return to the conversation of that dehumanizing undercurrent that we're constantly working against, that PACC is really addressing from this community angle, and really helping up build a community to counter so much of what's going on in those areas where people are taking advantage and trying to target us. And I think, so we'll definitely turn back to that in later in the panel. So I want to invite Zahra Billoo to jump in and tell us about the work that CAIR does, and specifically CAIR San Francisco.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mayida, and thank you so much, Rania, and thank you so much to the conference organizers for bringing us together and for facilitating a space for us to be open and unapologetic about the work that we're all doing and our support for Palestinian liberation, inshallah, or God willing. My name is Zahra Billoo. I am the executive director of the San Francisco Bay Area Office of CAIR, the Council on American Islamic Relations. We are the nation's largest Muslim civil rights organization with upwards of 30 offices across the country, including 4 in California, where we employ over 100 people and respond to nearly, gosh, I was going to say 1,000, but 1,000 is just in the San Francisco Bay Area, legal services requests every year. And so thousands of people each year call us The core of our work for a very long time has been to provide civil rights legal services to individuals who are facing discrimination because they are Muslim or mistaken for Muslim. During Trump 1, actually, right around Trump 1, before that, we were getting ready. We started to offer immigration legal services because what became really clear to us is that though many people in Arab and Muslim communities have the privilege of full documentation and status, many don't. And when the Trump administration, right-wingers, and anti-Palestinian activists were going to target our communities, the canaries in the coal mine would be those of us who were undocumented, those who were not US citizens. And so we began to offer immigration legal services. We also work with the media on a regular basis. In October alone, we were on television, news, or radio at least once a day, offering our perspective as American Muslims, because so often what we find is that it's easiest to speak in the echo chamber. We talk to the people who know us, we talk to the people who agree with us, but it's the people on the other side, the people in the middle who don't know us and who often don't have access to us. And so we use mainstream and earned media to put our narrative out there. We work with elected officials to remind them who they work for, that they work for us. And we work with community members to remind them to hold their employees, figuratively, accountable, right? Show up and vote and then engage afterwards. And then the most important thing that we do is community engagement and outreach, because I can tell you what to do if the FBI shows up at your door. But if your neighbor doesn't know what to do, then we're all in danger. I can tell you how to protect your child from being bullied at school. My child won't be bullied at school, but someone else in the community doesn't know and is allowing their kid to be targeted and harassed because they don't know. And so we work through mosques, college campuses, high school campuses, and community organizations to ensure that people know how to get the help that they need. That's where we were. That's who we are. I want to double click into what the last 2 years have been like. In 30 years of tracking Islamophobia, the last 2 have been the absolute worst. We've documented an unprecedented number of people who are experiencing hate crimes and hate incidents. Just last night, someone called again and said, I was assaulted while I was out there advocating for Palestine. We're seeing, of course, more and more people who are facing issues when they are traveling and or who are fearful of law enforcement targeting. And I'll come back to that with a story. Employment discrimination. Unfortunately, this has been the worst wake-up call among some of the most privileged members of our communities. People thought, well, I have a high-powered role and I make a lot of money, so I should be safe. What they learned in the last 2 years was that they were not. That access and wealth did not actually equate to authority, right? And so the moment they wanted to talk about Palestine at Google or at Meta or at their big hospital, they were being silenced, and in many cases, they were being terminated. Some of the worst employment complaints we've seen in the last 2 years have been from these sectors where people really thought that they amassed power because they were amassing wealth, right? And so in tech, in medicine, and in academia, we've seen, again, more school bullying and harassment. Pro-Israel voices and advocates have been working really hard to punish teachers who would attempt to educate their students about the truth of what is happening in Palestine. They have targeted young kids for things as simple as wearing that very viral Wear the Peace t-shirt with the Palestine map in watermelon colors on it, right? And so academia, including secondary education and middle school, elementary school, have been highly targeted. And so we've been working on all of those issues. Among the learnings that we've had have been the need to really broaden how we're looking at Islamophobia and to distinguish Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian racism. When we talk about Islamophobia, what we're really clear about is that it's not limited to Muslims. I speak often about how the first person murdered in an anti-Muslim hate crime post 9/11 was a Sikh American, not a Muslim. And so we've deepened our understanding in that way, that when we talk about Islamophobia, it's people who are Muslim or mistaken for Muslim, right? That includes Sikh Americans, that includes Arab Christians. Many times that's going to include not Muslim family members or friends of Muslims. And so sometimes people will say, well, this new wave that we're facing right now, it's heightened Islamophobia. And I would say it is, but it is coupled with anti-Palestinian racism, right? Which is defined differently. And so the Association of Palestinian Lawyers in Canada, I forget their exact name, but it was a Canadian group that set out first to define it. And the quote that comes from their definition that is repeated often is that anti-Palestinian racism is a form of racism that silences, excludes, erases, stereotypes, defames, or dehumanizes Palestinians or their narratives, right? And so we see this actually manifesting a little bit differently than Islamophobia. It's going to include denying the Nakba, justifying violence against Palestinians, as so many of our elected officials have done in the last 2 years, and honestly for over 70, failing to acknowledge Palestinians as indigenous people. We see this a lot from pro-Israel groups. So there was nobody there when we came and we founded Israel. No, there were people there, right? And so that's anti-Palestinian racism, and it's different from Islamophobia. Erasing the human rights and equal dignity and worth of Palestinians, excluding or pressuring others to exclude Palestinian perspectives, defaming Palestinians and their non-Palestinian allies. How much of this did we see in the Zohran Mamdani race in New York? His issue was he was Muslim and he was pro-Palestine. And equating them, right? Like any support for Palestine is labeled anti-Semitic. Any support, right? And anti-Semitism has been weaponized to silence Palestinian voices. And so Islamophobia is at a 30-year high, as is anti-Palestinian racism. And anytime you hear somebody talking about how high the numbers are or how bad it is, and I'll tell you that there were over 8,000 complaints received by our offices across the country in 2024, keep in mind that many people are also not coming forward, right? Is that for every person that comes forward, there are many people who are afraid to, who don't want to get fired, who will shut up and put up because they think that that keeps them safer. Or, by the way, who feel like it's not going to make a difference because what they see so often is that there are not that many organizations willing and able to respond. There are not resources to assist with this. So that's the environment that we're operating in. And I'll share one story. Our biggest case right now in California, actually, many of you have heard about Sami Hamdi. He is a British national, a journalist who was touring the United States. And I'm using his story today because somebody asked, well, is this Islamophobia? And I said, no, it's actually like anti-Palestinian racism, and it is authoritarianism, right? And so in Sami's case, he is touring the United States. He's in the United States on a valid visa. And about 2 weeks ago, wow, it has been 2 weeks, about 2 weeks ago, tomorrow, he was picked up by ICE agents at San Francisco International Airport. They told him his visa had been revoked 2 days prior. Mind you, he was on a valid visa. He had permission to stay in the United States until April of 2026. The State Department had revoked his visa, and the first time he was being told about it was when they were picking him up. So they pick him up, they immediately take him to an ICE building for processing, and then they drive him 5 hours away to an ICE detention center, where he has been now for 2 weeks, unable to really do anything. He cannot move freely, he's on a jail diet, and he doesn't know what happens next. He hasn't even seen a judge yet. His crime? Speaking about the genocide in Gaza. Asking Americans to hold the American government accountable for writing a blank check to Israel on a regular basis while people are starving right here in the United States. And so what we've done thus far is we've asked the court, don't let ICE move him out of state. If you followed Mahmoud Khalil's story or Badr Khan Suri or Rumaisa Osturk, you know one of the first things that they do is that they move their hostages, right? And let's use that word in this case. ICE moves its hostages out of state where people can't reach them, where their lawyers can't reach them, right? They don't know where they're going or when it's happening. So we asked the court, don't allow ICE to move him, and the court agreed. We asked the court to ask the government to force the government to explain why he has been detained. And we've asked the court thus far to allow Sami to be released on bond, and all of those things are pending. It's not Islamophobia. It's anti-Palestinian racism. It's also important to connect it with the rise in authoritarianism in our country, right? And how other communities are being targeted. What ICE has been doing to Latino communities for far too long, it is now doing to Palestine advocates, right? Some students asked me the other day, they said, well, does ICE target Black folks? And I said, yes, like what we saw in Chicago is that even Black folks are being targeted by ICE, people who are indigenous to this land, right? Or who have been here longer than any of us are being targeted. Though we've also heard stories of indigenous people being targeted by ICE. And so I'll stop there to say that one of the most important things for us when we zoom out of our service areas at CAIR, so legal services, media work, civic engagement, and community outreach and education, is to draw the connection between communities. What they can do to Sammy, they can do to any of us. We've even been saying that to journalists, right? If they can do that to journalists, they can do it to anyone. If they can do it to a British national, you know, anyone without Western European identity is at risk.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. That was a very important, I think, in complementary conversation to help build out what how significant and important the work is that both PAC and CAIR do. And I think it's important to underscore that Zahra's organization, as she's been describing, she represents or works as the executive director for the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of CAIR, and it is a national organization, and our New Jersey chapter and other states throughout. Obviously, many of the people on Zoom today are not from New Jersey, but it's important to underscore the national scope and the reach of the work that is being done. And while PAC is also more of a locally based organization, it is also very much nationally active and engaged in the work that's being done. So I think that brings me to thinking, as you're both talking about the legal advocacy and community organizing and how the work intersects in your efforts to challenge repression and systemic silencing. Can you talk about some of the examples of successful interventions? Whether it's, more, I think as you've already started to describe some of the vignettes or personal stories of folks with whom you work, where there have been successful interventions at protecting individuals or communities facing retaliation.
So
You want to go first? Go ahead.
I'm sure Zahra has a plethora of stories she can share. I actually will share one that Dr. Zaal and I are very familiar with. So again, with PAC, I think we're in a unique position because we have access to so many different community members, and we're a space that people come to not only in times of crisis, but like all the time, right, for their different needs. So one of the things that we've been doing is trying to protect our students on campus through different areas. And the way that we do it and the way we structure a lot of what we do at PAC is not to look at today or tomorrow, but to look at 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and like the long-term change. So what we were trying to do from the beginning, before the genocide even started, was this idea of building relationships with local universities, finding students that have that, leadership qualities that could create or help us build relationship with the administration. And so we had a couple of instances with a local university that there were some situations where the students, their event got canceled simply for it being in sponsorship for of UNRWA. And they received so many emails and different things from different Zionist organizations saying that this needs to be canceled. And so through our advocacy work and through a lot of our, coalition building, we were able to have a lot of, I think, very integral conversations that were able to protect a lot of the students on campus and also give them the perspective where you're not putting the burden on a bunch of college students and you're really taking it on as adults, protecting those students. But in addition to all that, we were able to get the event rescheduled. We were able to, advocate for them to have the event in the way that they had originally wanted to have it. And I think that that's what organizations like PAC, that's really the purpose that we serve, which is kind of looking into how to build those connections and build those coalitions to protect the people that we serve.
And before you jump in, Zahra, I just want to add that what's so important about doing work to protect young people in these kinds of experiences, moments when they are speaking up for their own community, for their own dignity, for their own integrity and survival, really, is about their survival. It is about protecting them from the significant harm that is coming at them, psychological, and sometimes, potential physical harm, as we know. And that is such a critical role of piece that we were hearing earlier today about holding, like, what does accountability mean, right? And who gets held accountable, and who has the responsibility to speak up, and in this case, protect young people who should not be carrying the burden of educating others. Zahra?
I struggled with this question. I struggled with this question because the interventions have been so challenging, and our job as leaders and organizers is
Talk
so
about that. Talk about that
Yeah.
reality. I don't think we need to try to sugarcoat it and just talk about the successes, but
I found one. No, it's okay. I was going to tell you one. I was like, that was my preamble to telling you one. It was to say, look, it is really hard. It is really hard right now, and our job as organizers and leaders is so often to find the cheer, to find the win. I'm thinking fondly actually of our office this week, where because as a C3 organization, it wasn't as though we could be involved in the New York mayoral race. Never mind that we're all the way out in California. But when Zahra won, there were just a few of us left in the office on Tuesday night, and like the joy was palpable. And on Friday, we had cake to celebrate. Our team cut up little like cutouts of Zohran Mamdani's face, and they put them in the cake because it was like, we have to do something to feel good about it. But with that said, one of the stories that comes up for me recently actually is back in March during Ramadan. There was a man who approached some people leaving Tarawih prayers at night and assaulted them. And he yelled some accusations about how they were Hamas and they were this and they were that. And he saw them on TV, and he was really violent with them. And the police were called to the scene. They arrived while he was still there. He was drunk, and they let him go home. And I thought, if this were the other way around, it would have been on CNN tonight. We would have been accused of being anti-Semitic, and we would have been accused of being terrorists. And there was no way I was going home if the assailant was from my community or was someone who looked like me. It took many weeks of advocacy, repeatedly calling the mayor, who initially was like, oh, I can't comment on it because we're still waiting on the police investigation. Except the police investigation slowed until there was local political pressure placed on them, right? Another council member who had a relationship with our community said, if the mayor and the police aren't going to show up, I'm still going to do a press conference. And she organized a press conference, and people came. And we pushed and we pushed. There were political donors in the community who said, wait a second, we have a relationship with these elected officials, right? So we used a number of strategies. We used direct advocacy, we used the press, and we used political advocacy. And the police came back. They interviewed the witnesses. They took a second look at everything. And eventually, hate crime charges were brought because the evidence was there. And mind you, the district attorney in that county is incredibly committed as a Zionist and an anti-Palestinian racist, right? He's both things. He has targeted pro-Palestine protesters repeatedly for disproportionate punishment. But still, the case was strong enough that even him and his team had to commit to it. So just recently, the case concluded, and the assailant has to do community service. He has to go to anchor management therapy, and he has to participate in educational courses on anti-Palestinian racism. Now, if you're sitting in the audience and you're like, well, he's not going to jail, we didn't advocate for extended detention, right? So one of the intersections that we sit at and attention that we hold in the work that we do is that jail doesn't make things better in most cases. Yes, some people should go away forever. But in our country, where we spend an exorbitant amount of money to put people in inhumane conditions, right, with other people who have done horrible things, we don't find that that's always the solution. People come out, they can't reintegrate back into society, things are much worse for them, and we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars doing that. And so here instead, we said, no, let's look at a restorative solution, right? One that actually attempts to make the victims or the targets whole, and that hopefully changes course. Now, granted, if he does it again, he's going to get locked up forever, right? He also can't go back to the facility where it happened. But we took so much heart in knowing that, like it or not, hopefully he'll absorb something from those trainings, right? Is that he's going to go through anti-Palestinian racism training. And so that felt like a win in this moment, because we both assisted the actual targets of the hate crime, but hopefully also made a long-term investment in the relationships with the political leaders in that city, right? I'm not talking about the still racist DA, but the mayor, the police officers, all of those people. And maybe we changed one heart and one mind. And we did that in a way that was true to our values, which don't uplift or pedestal policing and incarceration.
Bravo for that example. Thank you. Rania?
I thought of another example as we were speaking, that something early on that happened, because again, like I think PACC is positioned in a unique way because we have our 5 different focus areas and kind of finding the different ways of all that and how it intersects. And I remember very early on, we had a Board of Education forum that we've been holding for years now. And because again, one of our focus areas is civic engagement and making sure that our community comes to the elections, knowing where they're voting and how they're voting and doing their most educated job at it. So we've been doing this for years now. And again, we've been around for 11 years. And I remember we had something scheduled for, I believe it was October 18 of 2023. And then after October 7th, the first request was, you need to cancel it from the Board of Education. But of course they can't say you need to cancel it. So they were trying to persuade us through different ways of canceling the forum. And one of the main questions are, you need to come out and condemn Hamas. And I said, what does PACC, Palestinian American Community Center, have to do with Hamas? And we had to have several conversations in this regard, where we're trying to explain to them that we are the same people that have been inviting you all for the last 5-6 years to come out to the same event that we've always had for the last 5 to 6 years. And that was really challenging because, again, like I said, not only are we advocating in this specific sphere, but at that time we were also facing so many different challenges from many different areas, and so we were literally drowning. And then I would have to get on calls with people and like, please tell me how you all are not evil and how you're the exception and how you're this, and it was a very dehumanizing experience. And we've seen that through different avenues. Like I've had those conversations in so many different, whether it be sitting in a local official's office, or sitting in front of a classroom, or going to university and giving a lecture. Like we've seen it all in all these different capacities of different ways of anti-Palestinian racism. But specifically in this case, we kept at it, and we had meetings with the superintendent. We had because the schools, everyone got involved at this point. So we had meetings with everybody. And the same thing I kept saying was, this is an event we've been doing for years. It's an event we have scheduled pre anything happening, and we are going to have this event. And I think because of the fact that we set this precedent, and the fact that which is the ironic thing, was last year, so in 2022, PACC was the only organization that did a Board of Education forum, and we were celebrated for it because they said, look, like, wow, this community center, no one else did a forum and they did. But then now in 2023, we were one of 3 organizations that were doing it, and we were the only organization that was being pressured to cancel it. And so this juxtaposition of the reality, like, it kind of called out, like, what's the difference, other than anti-Palestinian racism, and that's really what's coming down to it. So we kept at it, and we ended up having the event, and it was actually our most successful forum. We had over 150 community members come out, and we really showed them that at the end of the day, the point of this is not any other agenda other than educating our local voters and our local community on their local officials and how they should vote.
Yeah, fantastic. And I've had the pleasure of being in the room when PACC has hosted those kinds of events, and it is such an important space for community members to speak directly to their values, to really challenge and question and bring up issues with political, people who are seeking political office, who are running for office, candidates who would not otherwise get an opportunity to hear from members of the community that will attend these kinds of events at PACC. And I know that CAIR has done some similar things around engaging voters and engaging folks in some of the get out the vote campaigns and other political efforts as well.
The last 2 years have made it really clear that voting is the absolute bare minimum we need to be doing. In some ways, it's like protesting, absolute bare minimum, right? And so the conversation in the Muslim community for so long has been, are you voting? Are you voting? Are you voting? But, and this is separate from CAIR because we work in a C3 space where we can't endorse candidates or donate to candidates, but there's been a lot of movement around strategic support for candidates, right? Like actually, what are we asking them for? And so you'll see more and more candidates are being urged to sign pledges that say, you know, we will not take money from pro-Israel lobby groups. We will not take money from pro-Israel lobby groups. We will not support violence, violence from Israel. We will not support weaponry. We will divest from corporations that invest in these things. And so there's been that push on candidates. And I think we saw a little bit of that this past week with so many blue wins and so many Muslims and pro-Palestine advocates who are winning. The hard part is that it takes time. There's also a conversation to be had about alliances on the right. I cannot believe I'm going to say this. Please don't hold it against me. But who would have thought just a couple of years ago that Marjorie Taylor Greene would
I
be
knew that's where you were going because
I was like, I'm
I've
sorry,
been
I hate
thinking
to
the
say
same
it,
thing.
right? But like, right. And so now it's like, oh, wait, like she's a voice of reason on the right. And what many pro-Palestine advocates are thinking and organizing around, and this is not an endorsement of far-right candidates or elected officials, far from it. I think we need to be very careful of aligning ourselves with white supremacists and anti-Semites to advance our causes because they are not really in it for the right reasons. Can they reform? Yes. And I think the jury is still out, but we can't be bound to one party, right? And that our organizing needs to transcend the two-party system. The parties are a tool, but our organizing needs to transcend that. And sometimes it's going to mean supporting a Green Party candidate. Sometimes it's going to mean supporting a Republican. And most importantly, we need to be strategic about it. So again, completely in a personal capacity, the conversations that I'm observing now is it's not that there isn't money in pro-Palestine communities. It's not that we don't have money to give. It's that we haven't been giving it strategically. We haven't been giving it together. And sometimes we give it without any actual accountability, right? And
Mm-hmm.
to the point about school boards and engaging school boards even, right? That is entry-level elected office. And I don't mean that disparagingly. I mean, everybody who wants to run for office doesn't need to start in Congress. They can start in school boards, and in schools is where we're having some of the most vociferous fights, right? Around ethnic studies, around education for Palestine, around how we protect our students. And so give the money strategically and then also be asking, like, what are the vacancies we need to be targeting? I have a really hard time attending school board meetings, council meetings. Like they're just hard for the number of Zionists that show up to these meetings. And so what are we doing about that, right? Like we can't just sit at home and complain. We have to show up as often as they do, if not more.
Fantastic. So I think that moves us well into the conversation about solidarity and how both CAIR and PACC, and you've already referenced relationship building and the persistence and the continuity, your positions on refusal to go away, refusal to be silenced, taking up space, making sure that the community understands that we have a right to take up space. And to continue to hold folks accountable once they're in office, right? So at all of these different levels. But I'll start with you, Zahra, because you started by talking about when educating folks about ICE detentions and immigration and knowing your rights, how important it was for people to recognize that stories like Sami Hamdi's, while it might be happening in this particular case to a Muslim Palestinian British man, that they are coming after all of us. And so if you can talk about what does solidarity look like for CAIR? How do you all engage strategically in solidarity and action?
One of my earliest experiences with making the connections among communities or across communities was actually a case about 15 years ago. A young Egyptian man came to us and he said that he had found a GPS tracking device on his car. When he posted pictures of it online, within about a day or two, FBI agents showed up at his house, admitted that they had put it on his car and asked for it back. I have told this story hundreds of times. It never fails to elicit shock from the listener, and it never fails to make me laugh for how absurd it is that I still have a hard time believing it. I remember when he walked into my office, I thought, is Ashton Kutcher behind him? Like, am I being punked right now? In fact, the FBI admitted to us that they had put the device on his car, that they were asking for it back, and we sued them. Now, our case was stayed because there was an older case already moving to and through the Supreme Court, Jones v. United States. Similar facts. Law enforcement agents had put a tracking device on someone's car. In our case, there was no warrant. In that case, the warrant had expired, except it wasn't an Arab American man the first time. It was a black man. The Arab man was accused of being a terrorist. The black man was accused of being a drug dealer. Different accusation, same pattern of abuse. The court agreed that attaching a GPS tracking device to someone's car requires a valid warrant. There was no valid warrant in either case. Law enforcement had overstepped their authority. And by the time the court reached that decision, let me just tell you, the technology had evolved so much that nobody needed to use tracking devices that big. They would just get the metadata from the cell phone company or whomever was providing the internet. They would get it from street cameras and other ways. So two lessons emerged from this for me. For me that we then really doubled down on in our community work. The first was that the courts will not save us, right? They are a tool. I say this as a lawyer who spent way too much money and time getting this law degree and this law license. I'm so glad I have it. It allows me to do many things, but the courts alone will not save us. Community organizing will, public narrative will, community power will. And we have to use all of these strategies in tandem, because by the time the courts get to it, and by the way, we have a much different Supreme Court today than we did in 2010 when this was an issue, right? And so if then I would say the courts would not save us, it's even more true now when the Supreme Court gives us a bad decision, really just about every other day. The second lesson, which goes to your question, is what they were doing to Black Americans, they would do to Arab Americans, right? And it was our own failing to not see it when it was happening at the time and to not get involved in the struggle at the time to stop it, only to have it then come to us too late. We see this every day now, right? That the way ICE agents are targeting people in Portland, in DC, in Los Angeles, in Chicago. Today I got a notice that they were coming to Fremont, California, after 2 weeks ago saying they weren't coming to San Francisco, California, right? And so when I think of solidarity, a lot of it is about race, religion, but some of it is also just geography and privilege. I am not rich. We are, like, most of us are not generationally wealthy, right? And so when they cut benefits here or they do certain things here, I too will be impacted. And so the push is, you're right, it doesn't affect me now, but it will tomorrow, right? And when I speak with Muslim audiences, I will often share, look, we have an obligation to advocate for justice, whether it's for us or for someone else, and whether it's against us or someone else, right? But justice is the great equalizer. It keeps things in balance. And I tell people, look, that's the selfless reason to show up, because it's the right thing to do. But most of us are too busy to be motivated by anything selfless. We are selfish. We just need to get things done. How is it going to affect me? The way it's going to affect me is if I don't stop it for someone else, they will come for me next. And so what we urge in our community work is that we understand, everything is on fire, so it's hard to show up for other people. We're not saying it has to be the primary thing that we do, but we do have to be intentional about doing it regularly. We need to advocate for Sudan, and we need to advocate for Yemen, and we need to advocate for Afghanistan. And it doesn't mean that those things have to undermine our ability to advocate for Palestine, right? We have to advocate for SNAP benefits and educational funding and against ICE. Pick one, but make sure that the others are on our radar and are at least something that we are mindful of in the work that we do.
So well said. Rania? You're muted.
Sorry. Okay, we're good to go. I was trying to find a slide that would help encompass this. This is the best I could find right now, so I'm just going to quickly share my screen.
Sure.
I think actually solidarity is everything. And I think solidarity actually exactly defines the moment that we're in right now. I think the Palestinian struggle has received the amount of attention it has today because of solidarity. And I think that at PACC, we have uniquely brought we've always, not uniquely, but we've always kind of rooted it, the explaining the Palestinian struggle through the lens of solidarity, through the lens of Black oppression, through the lens of Indigenous taking, the land back campaign, through the borders that are done by putting up walls. So we've always kind of seen the Palestinian struggle through that lens. And we've always tried to teach it in that lens. So as you can see in the slide, like this idea is that the Israeli oppression of Palestinians is rooted in almost all of the isms, right? So whether you're looking at, indigenous people struggle, racism, even environmentalism, there's so many different areas where the Palestinian struggle specifically, it intersects. And I think that is what has brought us to this moment today. And exactly how Zahra said, I think that as human beings, we are inherently selfish and we will only care when it's brought to our attention as to why should we care. I remember we had a person come in once for a training at our center, and he was he was talking to us, and he was like, I don't even get, why should I care? He's like, I'm a random person living in New Jersey. Why should I care about the Palestinian struggle? And then when we started bringing up all these things, your tax dollars are funding, the ongoing occupation and genocide of the Palestinians. As a person, like, wouldn't you prefer your tax money being, paying your own needs here, whether it be healthcare, whether it be your education needs or whatever it is. And when we brought up all these different things, he started saying, oh, I guess there is a reason for me to care, So I think that's one huge part of it. And I think other than that, the reality is that unless, we're only free if we're all free, right? And we all have to work towards that liberation. And we all have to keep in mind our, the oppression that keeps us down on a higher lens, whether it be settler colonialism or, white supremacy that's keeping us down. And we have to kind of unite under that framework to continue to fight against any form of oppression so that we can all achieve liberation collectively. And I think that's really what puts us in a unique moment. And that's why I say solidarity is everything, because solidarity is what makes like literally everything work. And that's what brings us to our moment today. And like a little bit of a, I think, a more concrete thing, as PACC, before 2023, a lot of our programming, we always had, some non-Palestinians that would come or some non-Arabs that would come. But after 2023, that number completely skyrocketed. I want to say a lot of the times our programming is more like maybe a 60-40 divide, where 40% are non-Palestinian or non-Arab that are coming to learn more and to stand in solidarity with people. And that's something that we absolutely, it means the world to us, because like I said, in the end of the day, when we are standing together and we're all working towards our collective liberation, we will be able to actually achieve liberation.
Thank you both so much. Thank you both. I want to move to the questions from the audience members or any questions in the chat, and we'll continue to talk as those are coming in. But if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can drop a question in the chat. Or perhaps a reaction or points, aha moments, or things that you are recognizing or understanding as you hear the important work that is being done in both of these organizations.
While people are thinking of chats, there's a couple of other things I want to mention in terms of specifically the idea of solidarity. Is I think that when we sit and focus on the world through our specific lens, our worldview is very limited. But when we start seeing the parallels that are drawn between different groups of people and different struggles, that's when we become stronger as a collective. So for example, like the IDF trains is trained trains the NYPD. What's happening in Bethlehem, the apartheid wall is like there's pictures of George Floyd there because what's happening to George Floyd is happening to Palestinians. What happened, and then there's recommendations going back and forth between Palestinians and Black Americans in terms of like how to handle law enforcement and how to handle brutalization and violence from law enforcement. And I think that all of this is connected, right? And the reality is that when we stop seeing it like, when we start focusing more on the similarities and the intersectionalities is when we can collectively work towards our liberation rather than it be the opposite. Because I always tell people, I make this like a challenge. I'm like, bring me anything that you care about, any oppressive, I can tie it back to Palestine. And then we could see how that when I fight this higher lens or higher umbrella of oppression, that we could be affecting all of us on the ground and in terms of how we, could see this collective liberation.
And I really love that diagram, that helps to visualize and for people to really see and recognize all of these intersecting oppressions. So Leandro is in writing in the chat, drones were first tested on Palestinians by Israel. Now they're commonplace with NYPD and other PD around the country. That same technology that secures and sustains the apartheid in the West Bank, we're currently using in our border with US and Mexico. That is correct. And then we're seeing that with the organizations, or I should say corporations, that are invested in doing that work with the United States, which are US-based companies like Palantir. And I'm blanking out on I'm recovering from COVID. So I still have COVID brain, but there's a corporation right here in New Jersey that is responsible for some of the weapons that are sent to Israel. Rania, do you remember the name? Is it? It's okay.
I'm recovering from having 3 kids' brain. I can't remember the name of anything ever.
Yeah, Oracle and Microsoft as well are complicit in all of the war machinery and the weaponry that is utilized. Zahra, did you have anything you wanted to add? Also, Ria wrote in the chat, the system of fighting against violent oppressive systems together is in building coalitions is the quintessential movement that Martin Luther King Jr. advocated his entire life.
Agreed. Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X both taught us, right? Think globally, act locally, and then connected the dots between different communities. It's also noteworthy now that he's been mentioned is that they were not loved in their time, right? They were terrorists in their time. And we remind people under attack of that very often is that you may look to people and think of them as heroes and feel, well, how do I do that, right? And it's never the case that it happens right then and there. Anyone pushing against the status quo is going to face opposition. That includes teachers, educators, lawyers, anyone, right? Anyone that's doing the thing is going to come under attack. And fortunately or unfortunately, we've had to teach young activists, like this is the cost of doing the work. On the connection between different issues. So the drones were mentioned, border surveillance was mentioned. Another unfortunate opportunity for cross issue solidarity is policing, right? So we know that police officers in the United States visit Israel and train with the Israeli occupation forces. That's where they learn how to dehumanize and subjugate the people that they're, tasked with protecting. And I don't even say this, I want to be careful here that I don't absolve United States police, United States-based law enforcement of their own sordid history, right? Like they started as slave catchers. That's where law enforcement in the United States originates.
Right.
But that violence continues, and the training for that violence continues as they travel abroad to Israel. Similarly, elected officials. One of the questions that has been posed of a lot of elected officials who are running for election or re-election is, will you commit to not take a propaganda trip to Israel? Groups like the Anti-Defamation League, the Jewish Community Relations Council, and so many others will handpick freshly minted elected officials and take them on a propaganda trip to Israel. And it's been important that we get those commitments. You won't go, right? And if you've already been,
Mhm.
like, don't sing the song. Like, don't sing the song, don't buy the narrative. But those are the investments that they're making on the other side. And so when we wonder why the people whose responsibility it is to protect and serve us aren't doing that, it's because they're being couched by those who dehumanize us, coached those who dehumanize us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the IDF is seen as the pinnacle of policing globally. I mean, it's not only the U.S., multiple countries go to have their police trained by the IDF. It's an extremely powerful policing organization.
And there are other, you know, one of the things I was talking about at the panel yesterday is sort of like this benevolent approaches that we see in some politicians or in some of the local, whether it's local school boards or other places, right? So organizations like the ADL, when they come in to try and do training, like for culturally responsive teaching, right, that becomes a way of silencing Palestinian resistance of, you know, and really pushing forth an anti-Palestinian agenda. So we have to be very careful about what is behind some of that, and connected to the IDF and some of this are movements in communities. And I know this particular corporation tried to infiltrate our community where I live here in New Jersey, that to create this sort of neighbor to neighbor platform, but it was a way to utilize and gather data on your neighbors and information. But the creator and the founder of the corporation are all former IDF. So we have to imagine that the agendas are completely skewed and what's being presented to the public is completely different from what the reality is.
Marge, I just have one comment and then we need to respond to Justice's question. The neighbor to neighbor was actually formulated by someone called Farmer. I don't remember his initials. He was a physician, an activist physician in Africa, where he completely deconstructed and discontinued the idea that when Western medicine is exported to any particular country, I think he worked in Sudan and then in Darfur, but he believed in the idea that it should be hand to hand with the people in the village and the community, deciding the medicines and transferring the healing, instead of having these clinics that were basically serving Western medicine, that even some of it was acceptable, that people were not going to take it. And secondly, we were exporting such bad stuff that he intervened with it. And so it's good to know that they took that idea and they transferred it into neighbor to neighbor, because I didn't know about the neighbor to neighbor. That's the origin of that concept.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Riyadh, for clarifying. And again, it's another example of how we've been hacked, right? It's like co-opting and taking something that had real significance in terms of addressing community needs, and now turning it on its head and using it against us.
Yeah.
And using data against us. So it's called Zen City, and it's actually been used in other cities around the country. So you can, I'll try to find some more information and post it. So to Justice Ahmed's question, the observation I appreciate in the Palestinian movement is that there's great cultural, non-political work being done without an air of respectability to diminish or belittle openly political organizing work serving the community. Would you agree with that assessment? And if so, any factors that you think contribute to this dynamic?
So I do agree with that assessment. I think that I think it's because being Palestinian itself is inherently political, and holding on to your identity is a form of resistance, and sharing Palestinian culture is a form of resistance, because there is such a strong movement to erase our identity. And it goes back to this idea of when I was talking of some of the stories we had earlier, simply being Palestinian is a threat. So me existing as a Palestinian is a threat because it's a threat to their narrative. It's a threat to any Zionist narrative of that Palestinians didn't exist. What is Palestine? Well, I'm Palestinian. My ancestors have been Palestinian. We have a culture. We have food. We have stories. We have we have a lot to share. And I think that's why a lot of Palestinians, they share their culture. They share, they share tatris, they share the foods we eat, they share debka, they share all these different things because when you're showing it and claiming it, you're showing that this is what it means to be Palestinian. Because there's a whole other issue of cultural appropriation that's also happening where a lot of things that have always been inherently Palestinian have now become Israeli, right? Whether it be the falafel or the hummus or the shawarma, which has always been Palestinian, now suddenly you have Israeli falafel, Israeli hummus, and Israel. So, and then even tatris, even the hatta, like at one point this was trying to be culturally appropriated. And I think that that's the idea, is that through showing our culture, through showing, holding on to the language, holding on to the stories, that in itself is inherently a form of resistance. And I think that that's where a lot of people come in. And that's why I also invite a lot of people to come to PACC, because that's where we come from. We exist as a Palestinian American Community Center to show that this is our culture. This is who we are. These are, this is not something that I invented. This is something that my ancestors have done for years and years, and we're preserving it for the generations to come. And I think the biggest thing comes in that they, one of the prime ministers of Israel had said, like, the old will die and the young will forget. And that's our whole mission, is to make sure the young don't forget that my children hold on to their Palestinian identity as much as I have, as being someone who's born and raised in America. And then their children can hold on to their Palestinian identity. And there's always this tie to our, as people living in the diaspora, this tie to the homeland where it's like you do belong, despite years and years of trying to erase this identity. And you can even see it. And back to this idea, what I was saying with UNRWA. Why is UNRWA so problematic in the first place? Because UNRWA is a relief organization made for refugees. Israel is actively trying to erase this idea of a refugee, actively trying to erase this idea of a Nakba, because people have never been displaced. They never existed in the first place. And so if you're constantly pushing that narrative of they didn't exist, they don't have a culture, there's no language, these people are not there, if you have people that will give into that will say, what culture do we have? Then they ultimately win. And so the idea is that by holding on to our culture, by continuing to teach others our culture, by showing it in different ways, whether it be, wearing a hatta, not traditionally, this is not a traditional way to wear a hatta, this is different ways that we hold on to our culture. And you'll see this with a lot of Palestinians, that they just, just talking to them about the makluba, talking to them about the tatris, joining and having those things, that in itself is a huge action of solidarity. It's a huge way of fighting this constant need to erase and silence us.
Can I add one thing? I think it's important for us to know who's working actively to undermine our communities and our liberation. And so a group to lift up here, to lift up here for purposes of everyone knowing them, but not lift up literally, is the Anti-Defamation League. As a non-Palestinian who is an ally to the community, I will say that for a very long time, I didn't understand why the push on Palestinian culture, right? In my family, we had less of a focus on Pakistani culture and more of a focus on the religion. But then when I would go to Palestine events, I'd be like, oh, the dancing and the tatris and the keffiyeh and the watermelon, and like, why? And so when I visited Palestine, it's everything that Rania said about the attempts to erase it and hoping that the next generation will forget. But I want to add a layer around like the criminalization and censorship, right? And so even in Palestinian territories, Israeli authorities have influence over what goes out in the textbooks, and they review those things, right? The Palestinian flag has been criminalized, and that's why the watermelon emerged as an alternative to that. And so embracing Palestinian culture, lifting up Palestinian culture is a means of keeping it alive. It is also an act of resistance, which was the thing I didn't long understand as somebody who had moved to the United States and was like learning American culture. It was like, oh, like, but this community holds on to its culture. Why? Because it's been criminalized, right? Because this is how, when you're taking our land and you're taking our food and you're killing our families, wearing a keffiyeh is an act of resistance. And so the reason I name the ADL is because educators will come across them very often. They have positioned themselves on the foremost experts on violent extremism. And I would argue always, but most recently, it has gotten worse, they have weaponized anti-Semitism to silence all support for Palestine. And so if you look at the majority of incidents that they are calling anti-Semitic, in fact, all it is are people who are advocating for Palestine. In many cases, doing so alongside pro-Palestine Jewish allies, right? And I recall an interview a while ago with their executive director, Jonathan Greenblatt, on a mainstream news channel, because he really is on CNN and MSNBC so often. They are complicit in the dangerous propaganda that the Anti-Defamation League is putting forward. And he compared the keffiyeh to white supremacist symbols, right? And compared people who want to wear the keffiyeh to people who want to wear white supremacist symbols to schools and work. And so I wanted to make sure that as we move through these conversations, we understand like who are the actors in our spaces that are complicit in the genocide and in the ongoing dehumanization of Palestinians, because they will position themselves as allies, but we need to be really careful.
Absolutely. And I've been dropping links and resources in the chat as we go. One of the oh, thank you for that. And you know, and the ways we need to try to utilize, whether it's gift to our local libraries or teachers or folks that we know, to gift them these resources or draw attention to the resources around teaching Palestine. The most recent publication by Rethinking Schools, and they have really been at the forefront of organizing and supporting against organizations like the National Education Association from really dropping the ADL and not allowing them to be in our schools. I want to make sure that we have time for some last thoughts from both of you. I think just as we think about what people in the room can do, we're talking about, thank you, Jackie, for pointing out donations, but you know, how do we continue to support justice and truth telling in our own communities? Obviously Palestine, but also the Sudan, the Congo, Yemen, Afghanistan, and what is happening in other Muslim and non-Muslim countries where the empire is really trying to continue to dominate and destroy.
So Zahra, would you like to go first?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so I think in closing thoughts, the main thing is to continue to expand your bubble. I think a lot of times we live in worlds where you get very comfortable in who you are, and you're in a lot of times in your own echo chamber. And I always tell people it's now more than ever, it's important for us to get out of that echo chamber and to challenge ourselves to talk to other people, and to educate other people, and to even just have conversations, you know, and really challenge ourselves and find ways to find those, you know, places of commonality, and then have those important conversations of how we could continue to move towards a world of, you know, free of oppression and a world of liberation for all. Specifically with PACC, there's a few things you could do. We do have workshops that we do host. We host all different kinds of workshops, whether it be you'd like to hold a Tatri circle, you'd like to learn Debka, to you know, settler colonialism 101, and what does that mean, and what does apartheid look like on the ground. I think specifically with Palestine, what's important, and I remember this really stuck through with me, is a lot of us have seen, you know, the genocide unfold over the last 2 years on your phone. And when you talk to people who have been on the ground, they say no matter what you've seen on your phone, it's like the worst. Imagine the worst thing you've seen on your phone. What happened on the ground is worse than that. And what I'm telling you is that this is still continuing on now in Gaza. It is still continuing on despite the ceasefire. And it is continuing on in the West Bank. And the reality is that we need to continue to challenge the narratives that we're hearing, continue to expand our resources. So I'm also going to put a link to a bunch of resources that we have put together to learn more about Palestine, and to really, you know, challenge yourself and have those conversations in any capacity, right? So whether it be, you know, on a very minor level where you're just talking or even delving even a little bit deeper into like belief systems and these bigger isms and where does this come from. So I think it's on all of us to kind of, challenge ourselves. So one, definitely check out our workshops. Two, check out a local event. I always love to say, like, try to find, a way to expand your network in any way, whether it be to go to another, cultural event or another way of like any sort of event. And back to this comment about culture is, I think that for me, like, that's actually a lot of ways that we see people enter the Palestinian struggle is you enter through the culture. Oh, that's so beautiful. Oh, that's so nice. And then it's like, let's educate a little bit more and let's take those steps further. And then lastly, just continue to speak up. Honestly, despite all that was happening with the genocide in Gaza, whenever you speak to anyone on the ground, the number one thing they said is, the money will come, we will rebuild, but we need you to continue to speak. And that's what every person should do, and speak to your networks at home first, and then challenge yourself to go to those board meetings, to go to those coalition meetings, to go to your city council meetings, to go to your school board meetings, whatever it may be, and challenge and continue to challenge a general narrative that's accepted, and to see what we can continue to do. So thank you all very much for having me, and I hope I wish the best end of continuation of this conference.
I echo everything Rania said, and I would say that I always feel so horrible calling it a silver lining, because it's been a silver lining that cost 2 million Palestinians everything they had. But I could not have imagined that 2 or 3 years ago that the majority of Americans would support defunding Israel, and that the majority of Americans would say and know and talk and advocate for Palestine. I couldn't have imagined that keffiyehs would be sold out everywhere in the world, right? And so I close where I started, which is that as hard as it is to find hope in these moments, that is what is necessary. Progress is incremental, it will take time, and it will take all of us. But if we commit to doing what Rania outlined, not just occasionally, not just when we're upset, but as routine, as a way of life, as people who are here and who are committed to collective liberation, I believe that progress will continue. And so I am hopeful. We all got a day this week where one of the worst war criminals in the world died, and one of the best young promising leaders became not just the mayor of New York City, but the mayor of America. Let's be real about what he is and who he is to us. And so we know the path. We saw Zahra do it. Rania spelled it out for us, and we just need to keep moving.
That's a fantastic note to end on. I really love that. I just want to thank you both for the incredible work that you do. Zahra, I'd offer to do the same for you, but Rania, when I get better, like, I need to give you a break and take your kids one day. Like, that's what we need to be doing for each other, right? Is like to think about all of the ways that I know we have to also sustain ourselves, continue to protect and support ourselves, our families, those that we love, and making sure that, as we were reminded yesterday by Dr. Aja Reynolds, that we have to incorporate rest as part of work. So many of us are exhausted, depleted, and we've got to continuously, I mean, obviously we all can't get tired at the same time, but we do have to continue to support one another to make sure that, we're here, as you said, as you both have said very, very eloquently, for the long haul. And yes, some of the silver linings are about making sure that we're staying connected beyond our own ethnic enclaves, beyond our own communities, reaching farther than what we've done before, and really disrupting those boundaries and those walls. I do want to and so I hope, and we'll find opportunities to ensure that, Liberation-Based Healing Conference has done an amazing job of incorporating all of these conversations and finding space for intersecting how we heal and how our practices can and will prevail. There is a film, I'm going to just drop one final thing in the chat, that opens January 9th around the country. It is a film by Shireen Dabbis called All That's Left of You. It will break your heart. I will warn you. Make sure you go with someone you love that can hold your hand, but please tell people about the film. It will be released nationally, and it was carried at Sundance and the Toronto Film Festival, Montclair Film Festival, and Shireen Dabbis is doing amazing work. And as a female filmmaker of Palestinian origin, it really needs to be supported in all of the incredible work that she's doing to bring the story of Palestinian families to the big screen. So with that, thank you so much. I will turn it over to Deja. Thank you again. MashaAllah alaikum. Shukran.
Thank you, everyone. That completes our day of panels and our conference of panels. It was wonderful. I'm hoping everybody can just take a breath of gratitude for being able to witness the conference these past few days. If you have any comments that you'd like to write about the conference that we could use, we would appreciate it. The chat is open, so you could leave them in the chat. Kelly has been sharing our social media pages, so you can, post and like there as well. But we would really love it if people could do some comments that we could utilize. I also posted in the chat the link for the evaluation that you have to complete to get CEUs for today. As a reminder, you need to complete one for yesterday and one for today. And please make sure your Zoom